He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're just a nurse, don't lecture me." My own son dismissed everything I've ever done, every sacrifice I've ever made. But just a moment later, he collapsed. And when everyone else panicked, I was the only one who could save him. This is the story of how a mother's quiet strength changed everything. Before we get into the story, tell us in the comment section where you are watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave your honest review. Funny how the people you love the most can hurt you in ways no stranger ever could. I'm Margaret, 62, retired nurse, mother of one, and what I'm about to tell you, it changed my life. It changed his life too. But let me start with the night it all unraveled. It was my birthday, just a quiet family dinner at home. I had spent the whole afternoon slow cooking his favorite stew, the one he used to beg for when he was little. The candles were lit, plates set, wine breathing. I even wore the sapphire brooch my husband gave me on our last anniversary before he passed. I wanted to feel like the version of myself he used to see, strong, put together, enough. And then Darren walked in. My only child, my pride, my heartbreak. He was 35 now, all sharp edges and expensive suits. A rising star in corporate law. The kind of man who shook hands with CEOs and never had time for voicemails. He kissed me on the cheek, cold and quick, then immediately started texting at the dinner table. I looked at his wife, Jenny. She just smiled politely and shrugged. She had learned not to make a fuss. We started eating, and for a few minutes things felt almost normal. Jenny talked about her nonprofit work with at-risk youth, and I told them about my recent volunteer shifts at the community clinic. Darren looked up from his phone and said, "You still do that?" "Once a nurse, always a nurse," I smiled. "It's in the blood." Then he laughed, actually laughed, and said the words that still echo in my chest every time I close my eyes at night. "Mom, come on. You were just a nurse. You don't know what real pressure feels like. Try negotiating a billion-dollar merger with 6 attorneys breathing down your neck. That's stress." The room went silent. I felt the air shift. Jenny reached for his hand gently, but he pulled away. "I'm just saying," he went on, "you can't compare what you did to what I do. Bandaging people and checking their pulses isn't exactly rocket science." I froze. Not because I was surprised, but because deep down I had always feared he thought that. Those years I spent on my feet through 12-hour shifts, holding dying hands, catching newborns, absorbing trauma like a sponge, I'd feared he'd never see that as enough. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just stared at the boy I once rocked to sleep and wondered, when did he stop seeing me as a person? Later that night, after they left, I sat alone at the table, fingers resting on my empty wine glass. The stew pot was still half full. The candles had burned down to nubs. I opened my old nursing journal, the one I hadn't written in for years, and I wrote, "He called me just a nurse. Maybe I was, but I've seen death. I've brought life into this world. I've held people during their last breath, and I've stitched broken pieces back together. Maybe I wasn't important to him, but I mattered somewhere." I went to bed with that thought still in my mind, hurt, angry, but mostly heartbroken. The next morning I was making tea when my phone rang. Jenny. She never called this early. Her voice was trembling. I could barely understand her. "It's Darren," she choked out. He collapsed. At the gym. He couldn't speak. He's on his way to the hospital. They think it's a stroke." I didn't drop the phone. I didn't scream. I went cold. Years of muscle memory kicked in. I grabbed my bag, car keys, and ran out the door. I don't even remember the drive, just red lights, flashing images, and one thought pounding through my head. He called me just a nurse. Now he needs one. When I reached the ER, I could see the chaos from the waiting area. 2 EMTs were wheeling Darren in. He was pale, slack-jawed, drool spilling from the side of his mouth. A young nurse was trying to stabilize him, saying something about dehydration. But I saw it instantly. His face had dropped on one side. His right arm hung lifeless. His speech was incoherent. It wasn't dehydration. It wasn't stress. It was a stroke. And I knew if they didn't act fast, he wouldn't make it. I shoved through the doors and shouted the words no mother ever expects to yell. "He's having an ischemic stroke. Call neurology. Get him thrombolytics now." Everyone froze. Eyes turned. One nurse recognized me. "Margaret," she whispered. "I remember you. You trained me during my first shift." I didn't have time to explain. Darren was fading fast, and in that moment, everything changed. I wasn't just a nurse. I was the only person in that room who knew what to do. What happened next still gives me chills. The look on Darren's face, the words from the doctor, and how everything I had ever done, everything he had dismissed, suddenly became the only thing standing between him and death. The doors of the ER slammed shut behind me, sealing me into a world I had once known like the back of my hand, but never imagined re-entering like this. My son, my only child, lay on a gurney in the trauma bay, unable to speak, his eyes rolling back as panic bloomed in the faces around him. And all I could think was, God, don't take him. Not like this. Not with things left like that. I didn't wait for permission. I moved like I used to. Quick, decisive. I checked his pulse, scanned the vitals, saw the partial facial droop and the limpness in his right side. I could practically smell the diagnosis. Ischemic stroke, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. He needs alteplase. Immediate CT. Go. The young doctor hesitated. He couldn't have been older than Darren, maybe even younger. Ma'am, I need to. I was a nurse for 35 years, I snapped. Do you want to argue with me or do you want to save him? That's when Dr. Leland entered. He looked up, surprised. And then, relief spread across his face. Margaret, he said, thank God. Everyone, listen to her. She's not just a nurse. She taught half of us how to stay calm in a storm. They sprang into action, and I stood there holding Darren's hand, whispering, hold on, baby, just hold on. Minutes felt like hours. The CT confirmed it. A clot lodged in the middle cerebral artery. It was bad, but we were early. There was a window. We're prepping him for thrombolytics, Dr. Leland said. You got us here just in time. Just in time. I stared down at my son, this brilliant, arrogant grown man who still looked like my little boy when he was unconscious. The same lashes, the same tiny scar above his eyebrow from when he fell off his bike at 8. I remembered sitting by his bed then, applying ointment, whispering stories while he sniffled. Now here I was again. Older, more tired, but still his mother. Still, just a nurse. Hours passed. The medicine did its job. The clot dissolved, his vitals stabilized. He was moved to ICU. Jenny never left my side. Her hands were shaking the whole time. I didn't know what to do, she whispered. I was so scared. You did exactly what you should have, I said. You called me. When Darren finally woke, groggy and confused, he couldn't speak right away. But his eyes searched the room and landed on me. And I'll never forget the look. Not fear, not confusion. It was shame. For the first time, my son, so proud, so sure, looked at me like someone who had been saved by a miracle he didn't believe in. Later that evening, Dr. Leland stopped by to check on him. He stood beside the bed and smiled, then glanced at me. You know, he said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, if your mother hadn't recognized the signs and hadn't insisted on immediate treatment, we'd be looking at a very different outcome. Darren blinked slowly. Jenny squeezed his hand. You're lucky, the doctor continued. Most people wouldn't have made it through this with minimal damage. You owe your life to someone who knew exactly what to do. Because she's not just a nurse, she's a damn legend in this hospital. I felt the burn in my chest, embarrassment, pride, vindication, all rolled into one. But I didn't gloat. I didn't say a word. Because the real victory wasn't in proving Darren wrong. It was in watching the world show him who I really was, without me saying a single thing. I had spent decades in this place. I had witnessed the beginning and the end of life more times than I could count. I had given CPR until my arms went numb. I had counseled grieving parents. I had been screamed at, bled on, thanked, forgotten, and I had done it all without expecting recognition. Because we don't do this for applause. We do it because we care. But this time, the recognition hit different. This time, it came from the one person I thought would never see me. That night, as I sat beside his bed, Darren struggled to whisper. His voice was weak, slurred, but the words were clear enough. Mom, I'm sorry. He didn't need to say what for. I just nodded and squeezed his hand. And then he said something I hadn't heard since he was 10 years old, curled in my lap with the flu. Thanks for taking care of me. I thought that would be the end of it. That we'd move forward. Heal. Reconnect. But what happened next, I never could have predicted. Because just when I thought the worst was over, I learned the real reason he collapsed. And it had nothing to do with stress. It had everything to do with betrayal. A betrayal that would rip our family apart all over again and force me to choose between forgiveness and justice. They say what goes around comes around, but sometimes what comes around hits harder than you ever expected. There's a strange silence that follows trauma, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that weighs, the kind that seeps into your bones and whispers that things are not as they seem. Darren had survived the stroke. He was recovering quickly, almost too quickly. The doctors were optimistic, his speech was coming back, his strength was improving, but something didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the way he looked at me, grateful, yes, but distant, or the way Jenny kept nervously glancing at her phone when she thought I wasn't watching. No, it was a gut feeling. The same instinct that had saved lives for decades. Something was wrong, and I was about to find out exactly what it was. A few days into his recovery, Darren finally spoke clearly enough for us to have a real conversation. We were alone, no nurses, no doctors, just mother and son. "Mom," he said, voice rasping, "I need to tell you something, but I need you to promise not to freak out." My stomach dropped. That phrase never precedes good news. "It's about the house," he said. I blinked. "What house?" I froze. My hand, which had been adjusting his blanket, went still. "What do you mean, my house?" He looked away, shame creeping into his expression. "Mom, I sold it." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "You what?" "I didn't mean to." "Well, I did mean to, but I thought." He stumbled over his words like a man slipping on ice. "I had some debts, and Jenny, she's pregnant. We needed a bigger place. Fast." "So you sold my house?" "It was under my name since Dad passed, remember? You never changed it. Legally, it was mine. I didn't think you'd mind once we explained." I stood up, my heart hammering in my chest. "Explained, Darren? That house was all I had. That was your father's house, my house. And you sold it without telling me?" "I was going to tell you after the retirement party," he mumbled. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I needed something to keep myself from screaming. "Oh, so the cake, the party, that was your goodbye gift before you took everything?" Suddenly the pieces clicked. The rushed invitations, the phony speeches, the urgency. They didn't throw that party out of love. It was a distraction, a smokescreen while they erased the life I had built. "You didn't even ask me," I whispered. "You didn't think I deserved a conversation? A warning?" "I panicked, Mom," he said. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought you'd be okay. You always are." That hurt more than anything else. I always am. The strong one. The dependable one. The woman who gives and gives until there's nothing left to take. I walked out of the room before I said something I'd regret. I made it to the hospital chapel, sat in the last row, and cried like I hadn't in years. I cried for the betrayal. I cried for the little boy I'd raised to be kind, who had become a man I barely recognized. And I cried for myself because I'd spent a lifetime being strong for everyone else. And now I had nowhere to go. Jenny found me there. She sat next to me in silence, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I didn't want this," she said softly. "But I didn't stop it either. That's on me." I didn't say a word. "We used the money for the down payment," she continued, "but something went wrong. The bank, it pulled out of the deal after the paperwork was signed." I turned to her, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means we don't have the house or your money." My breath caught. "You lost everything?" She nodded. "The buyer filed a fraud report, claimed Darren misrepresented the property. There's a lawsuit pending. The money's frozen, and now..." She looked at me with guilt etched into every line of her face. "Now we don't even have the baby's nursery ready." I stood up. Calm. Cold. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. "You didn't just take my house," I said. "You took my trust, my legacy, my home." Jenny opened her mouth to say something, but I held up my hand. "And I saved his life," I whispered. "I dropped everything to come running when he needed me." She didn't reply. She didn't have to. The silence was confession enough. That night, I didn't go back to the hospital. I stayed in a cheap motel near the freeway, alone, homeless. And as I stared at the ceiling, my phone lit up with a message from an old friend. It was a job offer. A private care contract, 3 months, excellent pay, in another state. I hadn't nursed full-time in years. But suddenly, I was considering it. They took everything from me. But what they didn't realize was, I still had myself. my skills, my strength, my dignity, and maybe it was time they learned what it really meant to be just a nurse, because I was done sacrificing. This time, I was choosing me. Sometimes, in order to find yourself again, you have to disappear. After I left the hospital, I didn't call Darren. I didn't reply to Jenny's messages. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I packed my scrubs, my certifications, the bare essentials, and I took the job in Colorado. Private care. 3 months. A wealthy elderly woman with Parkinson's and a heart as fragile as porcelain. I didn't go for the money. I went for the distance. I needed to remember who I was before the betrayal, before my son called me just a nurse. The job was hard, but good. Mrs. Langston, my patient, reminded me of myself in 20 years. Tough, blunt, sharp, even when her body failed her. You walk like a woman who's been holding her breath for decades, she said on day 2. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in weeks. The work grounded me, the routine healed me, the silence taught me how to breathe again. And then, something happened. I got a call from the bank. My pension account, which Darren was never supposed to have access to, had been flagged. Large withdrawals, misdirected transfers. Apparently, during the house transaction, Darren had moved the funds into a joint family trust, without telling me. And when the deal went sour, he drained it to keep them afloat. That was the last straw. The house was sentimental. But the pension? That was my future. He didn't just sell my home, he stole my independence. I stared at the ceiling of that Colorado guest room all night. And by morning, I had made my decision. I was done crying. Done hoping he'd wake up and become the man I raised. If he wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, then I would show him what it looks like when I stopped trying. I flew home. Not to the house, I didn't have one anymore. I checked into a hotel near their neighborhood, and I waited for the right moment. I went to the courthouse and requested the trust documents, and when I got them, my hands shook. My name was forged, badly. Not only that, he'd signed power of attorney documents claiming I was mentally unfit to manage finances. That's how he had drained my pension. He had planned it all. I hired a lawyer that afternoon, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Ellis. She looked me in the eye and said, "This is elder financial abuse, plain and simple." "But I'm not even old," I said. She smirked. "Doesn't matter. He weaponized your trust. That's abuse. Let's make him regret it." We filed charges: fraud, forgery, financial exploitation. The court froze his assets, including the house they were renting and the baby's nursery that was supposedly ready. Darren tried to call me. I didn't answer. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused on reclaiming the pieces of myself he thought were disposable. The first time I saw him again, his face was hollow. He had lost weight. His hands trembled. "Mom, please," he whispered. "Don't do this." I sat across from him, unblinking. "You already did this. I'm just finishing it." He opened his mouth to argue, but Ellis slid a thick folder across the table. "Forgery carries prison time," she said. "But your mother's willing to drop the charges if you give her full restitution and walk away from everything. Forever." "Everything?" Jenny gasped. "Yes," I said. "Every cent, every asset. I want my pension restored, and I want my name cleared, and then I want you to disappear from my life." Darren choked back tears. "But I'm your son." I looked him in the eyes. "You were." "I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for freedom. You see, sometimes the people who owe you the most are the ones who believe you'll never fight back. But I did. Because I was never just a nurse. I was the woman who held his fevered body through every childhood illness, who worked 12-hour night shifts to buy him books, who skipped meals so he could go to football camp, who paid for his wedding, and who stood over his hospital bed and saved his ungrateful life. Now, I have a new home, a new life, and peace. He doesn't know where I live. He never will. And every day I wake up knowing I saved myself. So if you've ever been underestimated, if you've been told you're just anything, know this: you are not just a job title. You are not just a role to play. You are not just a mother, a wife, or a caregiver. You are a force. And when you decide to take your power back, nothing can stop you. If this story touched you, if you saw even a piece of yourself in my journey, hit that subscribe button. Because on this channel, we tell the stories of strength, survival, and the quiet power of reclaiming your worth. You're not alone, and you are so much more than what they tried to reduce you to. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next story.